All right, let's go ahead and get started. So today's question is, what makes God's Son the high priest of a better covenant? And we're going to kick it off by starting in Hebrews chapter 8, reading verses 1 and 2. And it reads, Now of the things which we have spoken, this is the sum. We have such a high priest who is set on the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heaven. Verse 2, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle, which the Lord pitched and not man. So, first thing, what makes the Messiah's high priesthood a better covenant than the Levitical priesthood? Well, first thing, he's on the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heaven. So he has direct access to the Most High. There's no separation, and that is of great comfort, that there's no miscommunication or anything missing in translation. The second thing is, he is a minister of the sanctuary and the true tabernacle, no longer a carbon copy, something that's made by man that could have its fault and its deficit, but something that has been perfected or has been perfect since the beginning of time. So those are right off the bat things that make his particular priesthood better than the Levitical one. Going on. Verse 3 reads as follows. For every high priest is ordained to offer gifts and sacrifices, wherefore it is of necessity that this man have somewhat also to offer. So even though this is going to be indirect, what we can draw from this necessity of this man, the Messiah, to have something to offer is that he's able to offer himself directly. No more in-betweens, nothing to act as a substitution. And this by far makes his particular priesthood a mighty one. So he is a sacrifice and a priest overseeing that sacrifice. And there's no particular disconnection between that which is being sacrificed and the priest himself. Going forward, Hebrews chapter 8, verse 4. If he were on the earth, he should not be a priest, seeing that there are priests that offer gifts according to the law. Verse 5. Who serve unto the example and shadow of heavenly things, as Moses was admonished of God when he was about to make the tabernacle. For see, saith he, that thou make all things according to the pattern showed to thee in the mount. So let's first knock off this mount is, of course, Mount Sinai. But more importantly, let's answer the question again of what makes the Messiah's high priesthood of a better covenant. Going back to the very portion at the very beginning, talking about if he was on earth, he would be no priest. And what's that telling us overall? That it's better because his sacrifice, which was worthy, was rejected by men. And we no longer have to worry about that because he has superseded them by going to the true tabernacle. So whereas men may be finicky and based on their biases may reject you, we no longer have to worry about this within this particular covenant. It is better because we are no longer dealing with men who are manipulative, who would try to, for personal gain, draw you out financially. It's no longer about that. Okay, so that is another benefit of being part of this priesthood. It's the true tabernacle. There's no more of a shadow of the heavenly thing. It is the heavenly things. And that's why when Moses was admonished by God, he was told to be very careful to make everything according to the pattern showed to him on Mount Sinai, because it just takes a little bit. A little yeast will leaven the whole bunch. And over time, this yeast became very abundant in the whole tabernacle, whole priesthood setting. Going forward, looking at verse 6. But now he hath obtained a more excellent ministry, for how much also he is a mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises. So we're going to do this again. We're going to look at some of the words. And the first one we want to look at, of course, is the word for covenant again, G1242. And again, we're looking at the word that means disposition, okay, for covenant. When we get to promises, this is what we get when we highlight G1860. an announcement, for information, assent, or pledge, especially a divine assurance of good, message, promise. So I want to take away the idea of a message. So we have this pledge, we have a mediator who's a better pledge, which was established upon a better message, because he was a living message before our eyes. There was no more third party in between to separate us. We saw clearly. We have records that showed us specifically how the Father would respond through the Son. And therefore, it is much better. We actually have a mediator, whereas before you had the blood of sheep and lambs, but they stay dead. Now we have a mediator that is alive, that can testify to us of the better things, of what was hidden in the annals of time that come about by faith. Going on. Verse 7, for if that first covenant had been faultless, then should no place have been sought for the second. So the first one, it had a fault. Now, are we saying that it was the Most High's? No. But as we go on, we still realize it had a fault, because what it required was pretty much near perfection. Just to give you an idea, if someone was to commit adultery, there's no comeback. You're stoned. There's just certain things that, okay, you got caught in it, there's no way to come back. Same thing with the Sabbath. You broke the Sabbath, you're done. There's no comeback from that. There's no second chance, no thirds, no fourth. But looking at what we have now, we now have been extended a time of grace under this new covenant of the Messiah, a grace period, if you will, to correct what we are faulty in, so that we have that second chance, that third chance to get things back on right. And this is confirmed in Hebrews chapter 8, verse 8. For finding fault with them, he said, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. So let's first deal with that them. So sure, at large, it is talking about all of the children of Israel. But if we want to get more specific, we are starting to talk about the priesthood, because that's what we're juxtaposing right now. So first, you see that over time, the priests in Israel would start using their position for financial gain. So first, the Most High is finding fault with the people who he put in charge of looking over the spiritual well-being of his children. The next thing, yes, of course, are the people themselves, as they drift further and further away because their own desire for sin. And there is no way of coming back with this particular covenant, with the Aaronic, with the Levitical priesthood. But now, with the new covenant of the Messiah, there is a way back, because this is what is written. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with who? With who? That's right, the house of Israel and the house of Judah. So this is another point of division for many in the Gentile world. The Most High specifically said who he's coming to with this covenant. And if you know anything about Israel history, it was split up during the time of Solomon because of his sin. And most of the tribes were split up in the northern kingdom, while only 2 were given to his son, so that the Most High could fulfill his promise through David and raise up the Messiah through the Davidic bloodline. There is no replacement theology going on here. Now, does that exclude Gentiles overall? Like they can be no part of Israel or being a part of being saved? No, there's no exclusion of that. But Most High still has a special place for his children, for those he chose from the very beginning. His election is without repentance. Going on, verse 9. Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they continue not in my covenant, and I regard them not, saith the Lord. All right, so let's examine this. The question is, what exactly was that covenant that we're talking about? What are we juxtaposing? And I think this is where many people trip up at with the misunderstanding of the extent of what this covenant was. But only things is just kind of a cursory look at Leviticus chapter 1, which we're going to look at right now. Okay, so now that we're in Leviticus chapter 1, I'm going to start at verse 1 and we're going to go all the way down to verse 4. And it reads, "And the Lord called unto Moses and spake unto him out of the tabernacle of the congregation, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, If any man of you bring an offering unto the Lord, ye shall bring your offering of the cattle, even of the herd, and of the flock." Verse 3, "If his offering be a burnt sacrifice of the herd, let him offer a male without blemish. He shall offer it of his own voluntary will at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before the Lord." Verse 4, "And he shall put his hand upon the head of the burnt offering, and it shall be accepted for him to make atonement for him." That's key right there at the very end, atonement. If we look at H3722, this is what it says: "A primitive root to cover, specifically with bitumen, figuratively to expiate, or to condone, to placate or cancel, appease, make an atonement, cleanse, disannul, forgive, be merciful, pacify, pardon, to pitch, purge away, put off, make reconciliation." So this was to make one at one with the Father. Until the time of the Messiah came, where the true removal of all could be taken away, this was supposed to spur the people by giving up of their animals, bringing a sacrifice before the Most High. It was supposed to be some kind of reminder of the cost, the penalty, the heaviness of sin. And therefore, it should have, after seeing an animal shriek in pain, dying, collapsing, should have made our hearts soft and tender. But instead, what ended up happening in the end, it became a license for sin. All right, going back, we're back in Hebrews chapter 8 at this point in time. And we were at verse 9, but let's go on down to verse 10 at this point. So now that we know what was involved with the older covenant and how it was agreeing with the people to bring an animal to sacrifice so they could be made at one with the Most High again, now we're looking at the new covenant and how we will be at one within the Messiah's priesthood and how it's a better covenant. So with all that being said, let's read verse 10. "For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my laws into their mind and write them in their hearts, and I will be to them a God, and they shall be to me a people." Verse 11, "And they shall not teach every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest." So as opposed to us being reliant on a priest to get us through, to make an intercession for us, now the Most High, through his Son, is coming directly to us into our own mind, because we have become the temple of the Most High now, no longer separated by that veil of separation that the high priest had to go to talk to the Most High, and then he gave the direction to the people. But now the Most High is interacting directly with us once again. That is a far better promise. And just the whole idea that he's going to create the download directly into our mind and write it on our hearts so that we're ever cognizant of it by sending his Spirit to prompt his people, primarily the house of Israel. So let's go on to verse 11. It says that no longer will they have to teach, know the Lord, for the least to the greatest. So there will be no, in this priesthood by the Messiah, there is no echelon, if you will, so to speak. Everyone will be able to come to the Most High. And there's no reliance on the priest to get us there. Each one of us are being called in the community of Israel to be priests before the Most High and a holy nation overall. All right, let's go on to verse 12. And it reads as follows: "For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. All right, so let's dig into this once more. What makes the Messiah's high priesthood a better covenant? It allows for mercy. As we mentioned earlier, there are certain days that once those sins were committed, there was no question you're going to die. But now we have a pathway to get things right through this priesthood, through the Messiah, and where the Most High will no longer remember what we have done in the past. Pure and simple. It's a sweet deal. Now, does that mean that we continue sinning? No, because that's one of the first things that we're called to repent, to change our mindset. But rather, it's a call, as we learn more, to forsake those old ways, those old traditions that led to death, and cleave on to the author and finisher of our faith, of life for us as we know it. Going on to verse 13. In that he saith, a new covenant, he hath made the first old. Now that which is decayeth and waxes old is ready to vanish away. Now, again, many people will use this and say, well, you see, new covenant, that means the old covenant, the Old Testament, the old law, by extension, is done away with. No, the whole context has been about the sacrificial system of the Messiah coming in with his priesthood and what he has offered for us, as opposed to what we have to continue bringing to the Levitical priesthood. That is what is decaying and is waxing old and is ready to vanish. There's no more time to be offering up animals in a process that leads to no change in consciousness of thought. Indeed, it becomes a system that is rather a license to sin rather than a system of truly coming back to the Father. Anyway, as always, may this lesson have been a blessing unto you. And shalom.